You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers, sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone that lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I am Aradia. I am the creatively autistic coach and also the podcast producer for Fox and Raven Media.
And I am Cheryl. I'm an autistic peer support coach and body talk practitioner who helps people understand, accept, and love themselves.
And I'm Patrice, and I have a business called Autistic Presence, and I help women who are autistic and members of the Irish diaspora.
Welcome back to another episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today we are going to talk about autistic characters in media, whether they are explicitly identified as such or we just see representation of ourselves in them. This episode's purpose falls into the autistic joy and community bin, and was suggested by the inevitable conversation that all collections of nerds eventually have of, have you listened to /watched/read this piece of media that touches me? We are going to focus today on sharing characters that are autistic or ADHD coded and why we like or dislike how it was done. Not all media representations are positive by any means, and we may very well have some least favorite representations to discuss. Likewise, not all representations we identify as or identify with were necessarily intended that way by the creators. Autistic coded is very much in the eye of the beholder, in my experience. I think that this is a useful mental exercise, particularly for newly questioning or newly identified autistic people, to look at what kinds of characters you have gravitated to or against over time and how that maps against the experiences of people that you resonate with who also consumed similar media. It's a great way to counter imposter syndrome, to realize that clues are scattered everywhere, even when autism isn't in the title. I think we've all got a few items written down, so let's get done with the intro and just into the episode proper. Who wants to offer up their first character for consideration? I have mine at the top, but go for it.
I was going to say, I'm super excited, and I'm actually more excited to hear from both of you, because when I was looking at the notes, I'm like, I have not watched/read those particular, things, and I'm really excited. So please, one of you go first.
Sure. Yeah, mine might be a little shorter. So there is a show that was, it's relatively new. It's called Heated Rivalry, and it is a show based on a romance novel, and it is about two gay men who are hockey players who fall in love. And I probably just on that premise, I never would have thought to watch it, but I saw actually on social media so many people saying that one of the characters, Shane, is autistic. And in fact, the author of the book has affirmed that Shane is autistic, and the show creator and the actor who plays him have been open about playing him as an autistic character. And I found that show a very healing experience. And, Cheryl, being a Canadian, you may enjoy it just because it does often take place in Canada. So I'll say the three things that really helped me. One, that, a lot of people wouldn't have picked him out as autistic unless you really started describing the different traits. And in fact, I remember recently sharing with a friend, I watched it because he's autistic. And the friend said, oh, I didn't even realize. And it's a very, I don't want to say muted is the word, but it's not all the stereotypes we think of, like there's no big temper tantrums. Like his behaviors are very controlled and very quiet, and there's a lot of planning and logic. And being an autistic person myself, when I watch TV, I actually typically always need to read a recap after because I miss a lot. I'm a slower processor. And I happened to find a great article, which we can maybe link in the show notes. But there was a woman who wrote a blog post, and her name is Annie Malter, Autistic Representation and Heated Rivalry. Nothing about Shane needed explaining. So it was really through her blog post that I really started to more deeply process the ways in which he's autistic. And a lot of it comes through the beginning when the other hockey guy is announcing his attraction to Shane. And now that I've read our article, I understand what was happening. He's needing to do it in louder and more obvious ways because the autistic guy's just not getting it. And so, first of all, I didn't get it because I'm also autistic. And then it got me thinking about this is how every romantic
So
relationship has gone for
true.
me. Like, where unless the person's saying explicitly, I like you, let's go on a date, or something even more explicit than that, I don't know what's going on. And so I felt so seen by the way in which this autistic character, like the guy would be flirting with him, like, oh, I'm going to be like in Canada more often. And, Shane would reply something like, yeah, there's a lot of hockey in Canada. Like he didn't see it as like a bid for connection. And I would have answered the same way, because I need certainty. And unless someone's being very, very logical and direct with me, why would I risk wondering if it's flirtation and putting myself out there for potential rejection if I'm wrong, if I'm reading the situation wrong? So that's what I mean when I say it was a really healing process to watch this show, because I saw someone who reacts just like me, and it was treated with so much kindness and compassion and humor. And I don't want to give away any spoilers because it is such a wonderful show. I imagine many listeners have already seen it, but if you haven't, I really do recommend it because it is just so life affirming, and it really is medicinal for the times we're living in. It's got a happy ending. It's a romance. I don't think that's giving much away, just to say romances end with things work out. But there are two healing moments towards the end where Shane is having meltdowns, and he is met with someone being kind, saying, I'm here, putting a hand on his back, saying, it's okay. And I was fully tears streaming down my face. To see that on screen modeled as this is how to be with a person who's having a meltdown. It was just very heart opening for me. It healed places in me where I've had meltdowns and not had someone meet me with that level of kindness and presence. And I was deeply touched, by this representation, and by the quietness of the presentation, by they've talked about how the books, they span a time frame, but I think it goes up to maybe 2018 at the most recent. And they've said that, in 2018, probably Shane, the character, wouldn't have known he was autistic because it hadn't really entered the zeitgeist yet. All we know just in the last few years, what has come together of what autism is. So to sum up, I when I think about this series, I just feel like my heart just opening. I feel a sense of comfort, like it's more okay to be me, and just a sense that things can get better. We can represent the challenges we go through in ways that create more kindness. One of the best things about this series is you can Google online watching straight men watch heated rivalry, and there's actually there's a hockey podcast where they like live stream themselves, and these straight hockey players just fell in love with these gay hockey players. And just having that kind of representation, I'm not gay, but being autistic, having this experience of having an autistic person be embraced with love and compassion within the show and even beyond the show with populations who, and how divisive our society is right now, we might often, let me speak for myself. I thought straight men are going to criticize and shun this show. And when I saw straight men embracing and caring for these characters, caring for them, even as they're gay, even as they're autistic, that gave me a lot of hope for what we're capable of as humanity, to have more love and more care for each other. So I think I'll leave it at that. Highly recommend the series if you haven't seen it.
It's quite the review. I've heard of it, but just in context of all the gay girlies are excited to see a bunch of like gay hockey players getting all of the social media or not media attention. I had not heard this take on it. I am much more intrigued now than I was because I'm like hockey. Okay. Like that's
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I didn't even touch on the fact that it's just like really nice to watch. These are like very good looking men. I mean, it's not more sexually explicit than a lot of shows on, well, we see it on HBO in the US, but yeah, that was kind of a nice hook to get you in. But then it turns into this like very deep, emotionally sensitive story. And yeah, it's quite a journey you go on watching it.
color me intrigued. I actually have one of mine, I think, piggybacks really well off of that. So jumping back, almost 30 years to the Wheel of Time books, because that is my entire personality. There is a character in there, not going to spoil anything for these 30-year-old books, but essentially there's a werewolf-esque character who's got a lot of like Thor from Norse mythology. That's your basic character archetype. His name's Perrin, for anyone who's wondering. And I had not noticed him as being particularly neurodivergent until one of the fans of my podcast wanted to come on and do a guest appearance just to talk about how Perrin seems very ADHD to her. And that was a couple years ago. And in the years since, I have realized he has so many autistic traits that are generally attributed to him being a half wolf person, but also are not entirely because of him being a half wolf person. So he's got very slow processing. Like chapter 1, book 1, he's like, I'm slow to think. I am slow to speak. I am slow to respond. Everyone thinks I am slow, like really slow. I'm just deliberate, but everyone makes fun of me for being slow. I'm just very deliberate. He's also physically quite large, so he's like afraid of hurting people. So he's really deliberate, but he is hyper empathetic. Like even before his wolf powers activate, he is super empathetic, and his wolf powers activate, and now he's like smelling emotions. Really, so he's like hyper empathetic. He's also very, very smell sensitive, just in general. Like he can smell that people are coming up. He can smell that things are burning, like just way more sensitive than anyone else. His eyes are way more sensitive. Again, this is magic, but also he's moving through the world where like people keep coming to him as a leader because plot reasons. And he keeps being like, this is all so simple. Why do you need me to help with making these barely basic decisions? He just thinks everything is really simple. His eventual wife takes like 3 books to chase him down, and he comes from a very puritanical village, so she has to marry him before she can sleep with him. But still, it's like she is beating him over the head with her interest. And he's just like, well, I don't know. I don't know. She's like a really nice lady. I don't know. Eventually, she's like, marry me before you die, you idiot. It's like a whole thing. And there's this scene much, much later in the books near where I'm podcasting through right now, where he's on trial against some hate group terrorist guys that have just been a problem for the whole books. And they have their one very narrow take on the world. And he looks at them and he's just like, can you comprehend that some people have a different experience than you? Like, can you even begin to open up your mind to the fact that I can talk to wolves and everyone who knows me isn't surprised by that. They all figured it out. Please stop thinking I'm the devil incarnate. And it's just, yes, on the one hand, he's a leader and he has magic powers. But on the other hand, there's so much like, yes, he's more sensitive than others, but he's sensing real things. And he's making very deliberate choices that are thoughtful that lead to the team surviving. A lot of his arc is him struggling to accept his abilities and his skills and the fact that people want to listen to him. And he regresses back and forth on that a few times. It's a whole deal. But again, he finally gets around to just accepting, I have these skills. I have these abilities. No one else has these skills and abilities, but they're keeping my army of people alive. They're keeping my family alive. And I'm just going to embrace it and be a wolf man instead of thinking that I'm a horrible person for having these abilities. And I think there's some stuff for us to lean on there. I think there's something to that. If you really can smell people's emotions and see in the dark, and there is danger to be avoided with those skills, maybe it's worth leaning into. So that's one of mine.
Having not engaged in that media myself, it does sound intriguing. You know, the idea of a character struggling with being different and struggling with the value of those differences. Oh, I can absolutely relate. I can see how compelling the storyline would be. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like these books are 30 years old. they do not have the social or medical or any of the commentary we would have now on understanding queerness, neurodiversity, even trauma. And yet, the author was a smart man who read a lot of books and had experienced a lot of things. He managed to pull it together, even if his language wasn't always quite right.
Yeah, pretty timeless theme, it sounds like. Yeah, the human condition, especially if you're in any way in the margins. Yeah, this part of it is noticing differences and struggling with what to do with those and how to think about them.
And like everyone else accepts him before he accepts himself, right? He's got an army of 100,000 people who are like, yeah, that's cool. And he's like, I don't know. Is it okay? It's like, dude, come on.
Imposter syndrome much?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, this is awesome. These are two, whether it be a book or a TV show, that I have not participated in. So now I'm just like making a little list for myself. The one that I'm going to talk about, my main focus. I do have a few others that are kind of secondary that I think we could maybe talk about at the end. Maybe the ones that are a bit more problematic, or that, maybe can teach us things in a different way. But the one that is my go-to, it's my absolute favorite representation, is The Extraordinary Attorney Woo. And it's a Korean show, and the main character is openly autistic. There is no second guessing. Like, she has known it since she was a child. Everyone around her knows it. It is not a secret. And it's so beautiful because some of the things that even Patrice, you were talking about, with like not recognizing flirting, or, modeling how to be with someone who's having a meltdown, or being seen and validated that things get better. All of those are themes in this show as well. There were just so many little things, and I mean, this could literally become a special interest because it's just such a great show. She gets hired to be this lawyer, and she's got a photographic memory. She has amazing research abilities, but she has a lot of difficulty navigating daily life, right? She has to map out the route to get to work, right? She lives with her dad. He makes lunch for her. She packs it up. She goes. She has a very hard time with social cues and communication and making inferences, right? If it's not completely black and white, blatant, in your face, this is what we need you to do, she will be, going off into multiple fields. She does get bullied. There's a certain character that, just is not, he goes through his own character arc, but like that sense of struggling to be accepted in both friendships and in colleague relationships, right? That constantly feeling like you're navigating this unknown territory and trying to figure people out, right? And she doesn't always have this context of, this is a good topic to be talking about right now. Maybe I should get back into this, right? Like, whales are her special interest. And if somebody mentions anything even adjacent to a topic that could be connected to whales, she will be on that and cannot tell that people aren't interested. Like, just doesn't doesn't. And then there's this one scene where she's out in the community, needs to interview somebody for a case, and she's with somebody who is neurotypical, and there's a leaf blower. And she immediately begins to cover her ears and starts rocking, and has this, a very visceral reaction to this sensory stimuli that I've had the exact same reaction. And the person with her is learning about autism on his own, and he's, learning how to be a safe person. But another person there is not, and you can see the difference, right? She just looks at her like, what's wrong with you? Just kind of get on with it, right? It's just a leaf blower, right? And for those of us who have laid awake at night contemplating the destruction of leaf blowers in their neighborhood, right? I think it was something really that it's such a tiny scene, and yet it really resonated. There's so many other things that I love about this character, and I know that she, in real life, the actor who plays her, is not autistic, and we could have that conversation of, is that okay, is that not okay? But the way that she portrays this character is just amazing to me. I'm not going to say too much because I think it's just such a great show. I don't want to like have any spoilers, but she struggles with, recognizing romantic interest by one of the main characters. Takes her a really long time to figure that out. She needs a lot of support. She needs a lot of people who are her people, like her father and her best friend, who are like, oh, actually, he likes you, like he likes you, right? Like, and it takes her a long time to figure things out. There's one scene where they're staying somewhere else on a work trip, and there's like a clock in a different room, but she's lying in bed and she cannot fall asleep because all she can hear is the ticking clock. And she's like throwing something at her best friend, and she's like, "We need to find this." And so they go searching through the house, and as soon as they find it and turn it off, or like hide it so that they can't hear it, like then she can sleep, right? So when I saw this, I've seen it a few times now, but when first saw this series, I cried as well, Patrice. I did. I cried because in my entire life, like I'm 44 years old, I'd never before seen myself represented on television, ever. There was not one character that I could really resonate with and say, "Oh my gosh, yeah, that's me. That's my lived experience," right? And obviously sometimes there's problematic representation in terms of like autistic people needing to be geniuses. We have that in movies and TV shows. It's like, oh, they have to be super special in order to be seen as valid. And I know maybe that's an issue for some people, but I didn't really find it that way because it showed the dichotomy so well. You can be so highly cognitively functioning and yet so struggling in other areas and need so many, like you have such high support needs in other areas. And I saw that so beautifully depicted that I was overwhelmed. And I mean, I do also kind of have a photographic memory, and I'm a researcher as well. So like some of her traits were very similar to me. But I'm just going to end it with one scene that got me like in the heart. The building that she works in has a rotating door. One of those, what are they called? Just you gotta get your timing right. Right? You gotta get your timing right, step in at the right moment because it's gonna like get you stuck as it's rotating. And she was standing there, right? And she just could not figure it out. Like she was just overwhelmed. She couldn't even move. It was like her feet were like bolted to the floor. And one character kind of comes up and helps her kind of look at it more as like a musical dance and helps her like get into the rhythm of it. And she eventually is able to do it. But as she was standing there, she says, "I don't understand how I can remember every book I've ever read from the time I was 3 years old, but not be able to figure out how to walk into a building." And that moment, like I lost it because it was like when you have degrees and when you have, maybe jobs that you've worked or, places you've been, and you have this reputation of, well, of course you can handle X, Y, and Z, but inside you're like breaking over the smallest things. To see that represented on television was just so powerful to me. So I really resonate with like that idea of seeing yourself on television or in a movie or in a book. Like there's healing potential in that. Just to be seen, to not be written off as a joke or a villain, but you're just a regular person going through the ups and downs, the struggles, the joys, the challenges, and you're like, oh wow, somebody else out there in this whole planet is like me. And I'm glad we did this topic.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all that, Cheryl. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that show. I haven't, and it just sounds like full of data that will affirm my experience.
Yes. I think season 2 is coming. One of the main characters had to go do his compulsory military service in South Korea, and so we haven't had anything. But I've heard that it's season 2 is filming right now. So fingers crossed.
I have thoughts, but Patrice, do you have any other tangents you want to go on?
Well, maybe I'm just curious, Cheryl, how did it feel to share about how important that show has been to you?
Honestly, it's funny because I'm in this phase right now of being very much up and down in the knowing what I'm doing with my life and the ability to accept myself and my disability as much as I help clients do it. Sometimes we do, we're not robots. We struggle. Even with all of our training and all of our experience, and just kind of being reminding myself of that show and how I felt and what I kind of learned from it. Just a gentle reminder of, disability, disability justice, disability advocacy, disability education, whatever you want to term it. Like it starts with ourselves and understanding ourselves and kind of just coming to ourselves with a little bit more gentleness and compassion. And if people can recognize themselves and maybe not feel so alone, I think that's some place to start.
Yeah. If I'm able to see a thread between the three different examples we provided, it seems that having someone autistic to take in outside of us, gives us both, we're seeing ourselves mirrored back in some way, and also opens up some space for grieving how hard this can feel to be different and to struggle in ways that are often misunderstood by others who aren't autistic.
And I think sometimes even a less than stellar representation can still be a little bit of an open door, and it can still provide some really interesting conversation fodder. So I'll give a really quick example: The Accountant and The Accountant 2. So it's Ben Affleck, John Bernthal. They play brothers in this series of movies, and there's a lot of very stereotypical white boy autism. I'm putting that in quotes, right? We understand that, if you look at Big Bang, for example, Sheldon, right? We all know that he was autistic. He never got labeled that way. The writers never owned it. And I think that was a great disservice to viewers, seeing somebody with autistic traits that was constantly getting made fun of and having trouble, socializing and, constantly falling on his face, but just for laughs and not for any like deeper, message. But with The Accountant, he's autistic. He knows it. He owns it. Everyone around him knows it. And yes, there are those stereotypical things, right? Being, struggling with empathy, struggling with, making connections with other people, being very literal, being a math genius, right? We've got some stereotypical autistic depictions in it. And yet, there is a scene in the second movie where the two brothers are having a conversation. And I cannot tell you, like, we've got one who's autistic and the brother is so ADHD coded, I can't even tell you. So it's like they're having a conversation, and the way that this conversation is going, I just kind of stopped, my mouth dropped open, and it was me and my brother. I'm autistic, and I strongly suspect that one of my brothers is ADHD as well. And it was like looking in a mirror. I was watching this conversation go, and like the one being so literal, the one kind of like poking at him, trying to get a reaction. And there's this other scene where the autistic character is like line dancing, and he's just like at first, so awkward and struggling with the steps. And then as he starts to really like get into the music and like feel more comfortable, he starts really owning it. And by the end, he has this smile on his face that anyone who has struggled with like motor skills or coordination, but like finally get something and is accepted by the people around them, like you get that like joy. It was just like tangible. So I do feel like sometimes, even if there's problematic aspects to a representation, it can still start a conversation. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, or if you have like a semi okay example of representation.
I've got two tangents on this. One's about movies and actors, which I guess actually kind of has two tangents in it. But okay, so there's this movie that I have not heard talked about hardly ever, but it was Sigourney Weaver and Alan Rickman, and it was called Snowcake. And it's the basic premise is that Alan Rickman picks up this teenager to give her a ride, and it might be in Canada. There's nothing except snow and trucks, so I'm assuming it's Canada.
Likely.
And like immediately, like 5 minutes in, they have a horrible car accident, and the girl dies. So he ends up connecting with her mother because he was the driver, and the mother is autistic, and like the daughter was her like ADHD manic pixie dream girl support person, and so the whole movie is them figuring that out. And I read, and my mom watched it when she was in her like discovering all autistic media phase, and she was like, I hate this movie because I see myself in it too much. Like she was like, no, that is too accurate. I don't want to watch it. I'm not having fun. And I read an article a while later. I'm less interested in the movie and more in the actors. Alan Rickman specifically very deliberately learned nothing about autism before filming as a deliberate choice, because he's like, my character knows nothing about autism. So I need his reactions to whatever the hell she's doing to be as authentically like ableist and confused and overwhelmed as possible. And Sigourney Weaver obviously is not autistic to the best of my knowledge, but she freaked my mom out with how accurate the depiction was. Likewise, Rain Man, usually held up as an example of bad representation because whatever, whatever. But the first time that my brother saw it and like freaked out at one of the scenes with the fire alarm going off, my mom
Mhm.
looked at him and was like, oh, and like that click, just the way that my little brother responded to that, she was like, okay, no, confirmed, confirmed. I know what I'm looking at. Because I'm just going to keep riffing off of my mom because she is my entire lens into this. Another book that I had thought about bringing to this discussion is even older than Wheel of Time, because apparently that's what I do as I read old sci-fi. My mom actually originally gave me the Harper Hall of Pern trilogy. So if you're familiar with the Anne McCaffrey Dragon Riders of Pern, there's another little corner which is set off to the side in the Harper Hall. And the main character of that is not autistic, but she is a musical savant. I mean, the name Harper Hall, right? It's all about music because Anne McCaffrey loves music. She's like a serious music special interest person. All of her books have a musical thread in them. It's super cool. But this character, mentally, is totally not autistic, but her experience living in an environment where she is ostracized, mocked, shunned, and even deliberately disabled by her caregivers because of her musical abilities, it's very autistic coded. Like her retreat from people, her disinterest in dealing with people, her lack of social skills when she finally gets out of her, rural, isolated, conservative space. It's all very autistic coded. And then 3 years later, you time jump and she's just like a normal social masterminding the politics of the planet, sort of thing. And my mom always resonated with her because of the music thing. She also was in a family where there was less musical talent than there was. There were some people, but not being taken seriously for her musical abilities was like a thing she really resonated with. And looking at I've been rereading the Mendeley books, and it made me think about how much context matters for our experience of being autistic or any other state. Like, autism is a real disability. It has like biomechanical realities to it. And also, it's a massive social construct. The ableism that we live with, the conservatism, the mocking of our special interests, the you need to just gut fish and haul lines. Why are you continuing to compose songs in the corner? That is an element too. How many of us are extra contorted and traumatized and distorting ourselves because of the social context that we're in? And if we get given a space where, hey, you're a brilliant songwriter, let us give you the space and the resources and the emotional support and the technical know-how that you need to expand this skill and feel like you're a valuable member of the community. And then she totally changes. And because this character is not truly autistic, she becomes less autistic in terms of my interpretation. But like, I know for myself that I've had a much more accepting experience of my autism, both as a child and as an adult, than a lot of people I interact with. And it shows. It shows in the ways that we choose to wear our clothes, or how we choose to travel, or how we choose to manage our meals. Like, it matters. The context matters for how we interface with all of that. And I think that's true for all humans. But in this context, I think it's really helpful to remember that our environment and our autism are not completely unrelated.
I think that's a really good point. And I think it's so interesting because even the fact that we're having this conversation right now, we're talking about books, TV shows, movies, where we have found characters that we resonate with who have either autistic or ADHD traits or other traits that could very much, coincide with the autistic experience. And I think what's really interesting about all of this is sometimes there's a huge disconnect for a lot of autistic people when we see a character get treated a certain way, especially positively in media. And then we have this thought, however briefly, ah, they're just like me and they're popular and they are kind of embarrassed themselves all the time, but everything gets smoothed over, they have all these friends, everything works out for them in the end, they have their job, they have all this stuff, like they never really show burnout or anything like that. So there is that disconnect, and I'm thinking about like New Girl specifically. I do love New Girl. It's one of my favorite shows. I love it. But if I'm being very honest, like Nick, the one of the main male characters, he is ADHD coded, like for sure. And if he was somebody in real life, he would not be treated the same way. Right? He is, he's one of those people who, wears the same clothes quite a bit, that same hoodie. He's a bartender, and he's better with people like when he's standing behind the bar, so that he doesn't have to really like interact with them up close, right? He's somebody who has a really hard time starting tasks, transitioning, and completing tasks, right? He always says, I'm going to write my book. I'm going to write my book. And then, life gets in the way, right? All sorts of other focuses, kind of come in. And yet, he's popular. He's got a great apartment. He's got partners, and, it's just, I kind of think that that is one of the shows for me that I think about, because one of the main other female characters, a lot of people talk about her as, autistic coded. And yet, if they were in real life, they would be, in my opinion, based on what I have seen, I don't think they would be welcomed with open arms. I think they would be made fun of. I think they would be ostracized. I think they would be seen as, oh my gosh, like you're a burden kind of thing, as opposed to you're just quirky, right? TV shows can be quirky. We are at times seen as plain weird, or a burden, or, somebody that needs to be fixed, right? And maybe you guys have a completely different take on it, which I'd love to hear. But I do feel that sometimes there can be a disconnect and a disappointment when we see a character that's neurodivergent coded embraced in a show, but in real life, not so much.
Yeah, I haven't thought of that so much in a show context, but I have a whole curation pattern with my music where I sort of found this thread a long time ago where it's music that is generally genre coded as some kind of fill in the blank hyphen pop, dark pop, synth pop, whatever. But pop always has to be in the name. And I have this whole curated 200 to 400 songs or so across a couple of playlists that are all, I call them songs to self-DX to. That's the title. Songs to self-diagnose to. Because they're all about being ostracized and being weird and having sensory sensitivities and having social issues and emotional dysregulation, and like not just like in the my boyfriend left me and my dog died kind of way, in the like I am spiraling and about to set Pluto on fire kind of way. And I'm listening to it and I'm like, you're saying these things that sound so incredibly autistic. But you also managed to get into a music studio and get this produced and have it be like shunted out to Spotify to such a degree that it just came up when I was listening to a Spotify generated playlist. And that always gives me it's a weird feeling because it's like, this is pop. This is popular. And I'm like, okay, first of all, it's not, because that word means nothing. But also the fact that it's produced and presented in this pop way. And yet it's also like, I'm the most autistic person ever, and I'm spiraling, and here's an album that is exactly the inside of your head, is an interesting dichotomy to try to hold, I guess.
That's a great example. And yet, I do think it's funny that you mentioned that, because in some ways, every week that we sit here together and record, in some ways, we could be having that same kind of understanding. Like, I'm going to be full disclosure, I'm having a rough day. I'm having a really rough day. And yet, I know that this is going to make me feel better. So I show up and I give it my best. I give it my best. So like people who are listening to us, right, might be having that same thought, right? Like, oh my goodness, they're talking about all these amazing autism related topics, and they're showing up and they sound, so put together. I mean, some days maybe more than others. And yet behind the scenes, right, we have our meltdowns. We have experienced burnout. We have, challenging periods at times. We have, a day at work or a day in the community when we're like, I can't do this anymore, right? We might have trouble accepting ourselves and our disability. So like all the things that we've talked about, like we have experienced or are actively experiencing. And yet sometimes we can actually come together and put together a pretty decent podcast.
Wow, way to just fuel my imposter syndrome. Like, what do you mean? No, I'm not doing a good, interesting, important job. I'm just doing XYZ. It doesn't count if I'm doing it. Thank you for saying that. No, seriously. Yeah, it's a complicated world out there. It's dealing with our internal landscapes and our artistic presentations of said internal landscapes is it's complicated.
But perhaps that's why we gravitate towards some of these, different forms of media, because we know that it's going to be a little less complicated when we're watching it, when we're reading it, right? When we're listening to it. It becomes a little less in us, as both of you have said today already, right? We're able to kind of put that character outside of us, look at their experience through that outside lens, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I have to figure out my life. We're just able to heal, be seen, be validated, be heard. We're able to, look at our own life through maybe a different lens after experiencing that character, right? And I think so sometimes the simplification of neurodivergence in media can sometimes be a welcome relief. Even if we might have this conversation after, like, oh, I think they didn't quite get that right, or oh, I think maybe that was a little simplified, like maybe for good reason. Like sometimes our inner world is so complex and challenging that it's nice to kind of just look at something outside of ourselves for a little bit.
Okay. Well, that was fun. I know that it's one of those conversations that could either go forever or take a natural break point. Because, yeah, when people start getting into trading comparisons and analogies, it could go until the cows come home. This is technically an evergreen topic. But for now, for today, that was an awesome, friendly, and autistic discussion around some of our most favorite autistic coded characters in media, whether they were explicitly coded that way or not. And we covered stuff like imposter syndrome and popular and simple takes on representation and how they can be good for us and not both ways. And it just helped me appreciate how broad the concept of good representation can be. Because it turns out if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So if you've met one interpretation of an autistic coded character, you've met one. Anyway, as a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces. You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, peers, and anyone who lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. Thank you for listening to us talking about autistic stuff for autistic people. New episodes come out on alternating Mondays. Keep the conversation going on our Blue Sky feed or send us your constructive comments and feedback via email at autisticstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, see if you can find autistically coded characters in your favorite piece of media that you never found before. Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.